We tend to think of, real monsters as being somewhere else, far away, hidden.
Right, not right next door.
Exactly. But this deep dive, it asks you to think, what if the worst horrors unfold right there, in plain sight? Think about Imperial Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio. For years, people living there dealt with this awful smell. Sickening, really.
And they explained it away, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Said it was the sausage factory nearby, or maybe bad pipes. Something ordinary.
But it wasn't ordinary at all.
Not even close.
No.
They had no idea their neighbor, Anthony Sowell. He was living with the bodies of 11 women inside his house.
It's deeply disturbing how something so horrific can be masked by just everyday life. That smell became, like, background noise.
Something they rationalized instead of, really investigating. So when the police finally did go into Sal's house, that was October 2009, what they found was just almost unbelievable.
11 women. Their remains scattered through the house, the yard.
Yeah. So our mission today, we're trying to look behind the mask of Anthony Sowell. The media called him the Cleveland Strangler.
But it's more than just the horrific details, isn't it?
Right. We need to understand the societal cracks, the illusion of normalcy that let this go on for so long. How did it stay hidden?
We really need to explore both sides, Sowell's actions, definitely, but also the bigger picture, the vulnerabilities, the signs that were missed.
The systemic problems, maybe?
Absolutely. What allowed this to happen?
Okay, so let's start with the setting. Imperial Avenue. It's in Cleveland's Mount Pleasant neighborhood.
Right, mostly African-American, working-class area, facing some real economic struggles.
And Sowell's house, from the outside, probably looked like any other house on the street. Unremarkable.
Blending in, especially in a place already dealing with hardship.
That socioeconomic context, it's important, you think?
I do, because when communities are strained, resources stretched thin, sometimes problems, even big ones, can get overlooked. Or, like you said, rationalized.
But still, that smell, for years, neighbors complained. They definitely noticed it.
They did. But the accepted stories took over, right? Raised sausage, the sewers.
Yeah. It's just striking, isn't it? This really strong signal, a horrible smell, and it just gets dismissed.
It speaks volumes about how we, look for explanations that fit what we already know.
Yeah.
Or what we want to believe.
Maybe it just became another unpleasant thing in an area that already had its share of problems.
Could be. Part of the landscape, almost. An accepted discomfort.
And that, for me, that feels like the first layer of the mask.
Yeah.
Not one Sowell put on, maybe, but one made of circumstance. Collective denial, almost.
Yeah, a sort of denial. It kept the horror inside that house hidden.
Makes you wonder, what's the breaking point? When does a bad smell become something you have to investigate seriously?
In this case, tragically, the breaking point came far too late.
Okay, so let's talk about Sowell himself. Anthony Sowell, born 1959. He was in the U.S. Marine Corps at one point.
Yeah, that detail often comes up, service record.
But it doesn't really tell you much about what came later, does it?
Not necessarily. People from all backgrounds can have deep problems. Violent tendencies aren't exclusive to any group or experience.
What is really significant, though, is 1989, his arrest.
Kidnapping and an attempted rape, a pregnant woman.
He lured her to his house, the same house on Imperial Avenue. Attacked her.
And she managed to escape, thank God. Her report led to his
I
arrest.
pleaded guilty, attempted rape, got 15 years in prison.
So even back then, there was a clear pattern. Luring women, violence, sexual assault. In that specific house?
A huge red flag, looking back.
Massive red flag. You'd think that would be front and center when he got out.
So he's released in 2005, has to register as a sex offender, check in regularly.
Standard procedure, supposedly.
And where does he go? Right back to Imperial Avenue. Same road.
Wow. Just back to the scene.
And the neighbors, they said he was,
Yeah.
quiet, kept to himself mostly.
Unremarkable. Blending in again.
That quietness. It was like another layer of the mask, wasn't it? Hiding whatever was going on inside.
And the fact that he was released after that violent crime and then went on to do this. I mean, people were furious later, rightly so.
Yeah, huge questions about the justice system, the monitoring.
Yeah.
How effective was it, really?
It forces you to ask, what's the point of registries and supervision if they don't prevent something like this? Were the checks just not enough, or was he just good at hiding it?
Seems like the system failed. Badly.
Tragically, yes.
So between 2005, when he got out, and 2009, when everything came crashing down, Sowell was preying on people in his community, the most vulnerable.
The 11 women, we need to say their names.
Yes. Tonia Carmichael, Nancy Cobbs, Tishana Culver, Crystal Dozier, Telacia Fortson, Amelda Hunter, Leshanda Long, Michelle Mason, Kim Yvette Smith, Diane Turner, and Janice Webb.
Each one a life, a story, not just a statistic in this horror.
Mothers, daughters, sisters.
Exactly.
And many of them were facing really tough situations. Poverty, homelessness, addiction struggles.
Which made them, tragically, easier targets for someone like Sowell.
The pattern was just chilling. He'd lure them in, promise alcohol, drugs maybe.
Exploit their vulnerability.
And then attack, rape, strangulation.
He targeted women who were already on the margins, maybe without strong family ties or support networks that would notice immediately if they disappeared.
Which brings us to that concept, the missing.
Yeah, people whose disappearances just don't get the same attention because of who they are or their circumstances.
Race, class, addiction. Biases that mean their cases might not be investigated urgently, or at all sometimes.
It's a terrible reality. Their lives are seen as less valuable somehow by parts of society, maybe even by the systems meant to protect everyone.
And that blindness, that societal blind spot.
Yeah.
It was another layer protecting Sal, wasn't it? Letting him continue.
Absolutely. It highlights this massive societal problem. We have to value every life equally, treat every disappearance with urgency.
Otherwise, predators can operate in those gaps. And the sheer depravity of it. He didn't just kill them. He lived with them. With their decomposing bodies, hidden in the house, in the yard.
It's almost impossible to comprehend that level of detachment, that utter lack of anything, empathy, morality.
It's just living amongst death he caused.
It points to a profound psychological disturbance, a complete disconnect from the value of human life.
So how did it finally unravel? Late October 2009.
And it wasn't the smell, ironically, not after all those years.
No, it was another attack. Another woman Sowell lured in, raped, tried to strangle.
Yet she escaped. She got away.
And she went straight to the police. Her courage.
Incredible courage. That was the key. Her report finally brought them to his door seriously.
So police show up with an arrest warrant for that assault. Sowell wasn't home at first.
But they noticed the smell, that infamous smell. They couldn't ignore it then.
No. So a few days later, October 29th, they get a search warrant. They go inside.
And the smell must have been overwhelming, leading them.
It led them straight to 2 bodies, 3rd floor.
Just the beginning.
Yeah. As they searched more, the horror just grew. More bodies, hidden all over, crawl spaces, under junk.
And buried outside, too.
Shallow graves in the backyard.
Yeah, unimaginable. For those officers, walking into that, discovering victim after victim.
Must have been traumatic beyond words.
Uh-huh.
Day after day, the count went up, finally reaching 11.
11 women.
And Imperial Avenue just exploded. Media everywhere. Forensics teams, police tape.
The community, shock, grief.
Anger, too.
Total
Fair.
shock. And demanding answers. How? How could this happen here? Right under everyone's noses, seemingly.
That mask of normalcy was just ripped away, revealing a nightmare.
Complete nightmare. There was this feeling of betrayal, wasn't there? Like their concerns about the smell, everything had just been ignored.
And a predator was living right there among them, undetected.
Sowell was arrested pretty quickly after they started finding the bodies.
And then the investigation kicked into high gear.
Yeah, painstaking work. Excavating the property, identifying the victims, linking everything back to Sowell forensically. That forensic evidence is crucial in cases like this. You need to build an absolutely solid case.
His trial started June 2011. The prosecution laid out all the gruesome details, the discoveries at the house.
Horrifying evidence.
And crucially, testimony from survivors. Women who Sowell had attacked, but who got away, including the woman whose report finally led police there.
Their testimony. Incredibly powerful. So brave of them to relive that. It gives a voice to those who didn't survive.
Absolutely. And it painted a clear picture of his methods, how he operated.
Predatory.
Calculating.
The evidence really was overwhelming. Sowell didn't offer much of a defense. Couldn't, really.
What could he say?
So, July 2011, the jury comes back. Guilty on 82 counts.
82. Just staggering. Aggravated murder for all 11 women, kidnapping, rape, tampering with evidence, abusing corpses.
What's the scale of it?
Underscores the depth of his depravity.
Then the sentencing phase. The jury recommended death.
And the judge agreed.
Yes. August 2011, formally sentenced to death for the families, the community.
Yeah.
There's a step towards justice, I suppose. A measure of legal accountability, yes. But the pain, the loss, that doesn't just disappear with a verdict.
No, of course not. The wounds run incredibly deep. For the families, for that whole neighborhood.
Which brings us back to the bigger picture. This case forces us to look beyond just Sowell.
Right. How could this happen? How does a house on a regular street become a private graveyard in plain sight?
It makes us face some really uncomfortable truths about society, vulnerability, who gets overlooked.
Those ignored complaints about the smell? Does that point to a breakdown, maybe how the city responds? Or is the community just desensitized?
It definitely highlights the need for better communication between residents and authorities, taking all concerns seriously no matter the neighborhood.
Because a minor issue, like a smell.
Could be a sign of something much, much worse, as it clearly was here.
And the victims. This case threw a harsh light on how vulnerable some people are, didn't it?
Tragically, yes. Mostly poor Black women, struggling with addiction. Their disappearances didn't set off alarm bells the way they should have.
The missing again.
Exactly. It's not just about police procedures, though that's part of it. It's about deeper societal biases, systemic neglect.
Their lives matter just as much as anyone's. But the system failed them.
It points to a desperate need for equity, equal resources, equal urgency, regardless of who the missing person is. We have to address those biases.
And then there's Sowell himself, registered sex offender, prior violent conviction. How did he slip through the cracks so completely?
Did the monitoring system just fail? Was he that good at faking rehabilitation? Or were the checks just not thorough enough?
It had to spark a reevaluation, right, of how sex offenders are managed after release.
Absolutely. Huge questions about whether these systems actually work to prevent reoffending, especially for violent predators.
And his psychology. The ability to compartmentalize, the lack of remorse, the sadistic control. It's chilling.
He exploited vulnerability, pure predator, hidden behind that quiet facade.
And shielded by society, just not paying close enough attention.
A degree of indifference, perhaps, which is a hard thing to admit.
So what happened afterwards? The house itself
became this symbol of the whole tragedy. They demolished it in 2011.
couldn't leave it standing.
No. Erased the physical structure, though not the memory, obviously. The land eventually became a memorial park, a place to remember the women.
That feels important.
Yeah.
A way to reclaim the space, maybe honor the victims.
A necessary step for community healing, I think.
And so, he was on death row.
For nearly a decade, appealing his sentence.
But he wasn't executed by the state in the end.
No. He died on February 8th, 2021. He was 61, receiving end-of-life care for a terminal illness, unrelated to his sentence, apparently.
So, his death closes his chapter. But the questions raised by his life, his crimes, they don't go away.
Not at all. Questions about community awareness, protecting the vulnerable, systemic failures, they're still incredibly relevant.
The legacy of this case, it's a stark reminder, isn't it?
A reminder that we need to be vigilant, compassionate, and really work on those inequalities that let horrors like this happen and stay hidden.
So Anthony Sowell, the Cleveland Strangler, it's just this harrowing story. Unimaginable cruelty hidden behind such an ordinary mask.
A story of systemic failure, societal neglect, and the terrible vulnerability of people on the margins.
It really highlights how darkness can exist right alongside the everyday, and the need for empathy, vigilance, justice for everyone.
Absolutely.
And most importantly, throughout this, we remember the 11 women, Tonia Carmichael, Nancy Cobbs, Tishana Culver, Crystal Dozier, Telacia Fortson, Amelda Hunter, Leshanda Long, Michelle Mason, Kim Yvette Smith, Diane Turner, and Janice Webb. Their lives were stolen.
Remembering them is vital. Their stories are a call to action, to build a society where people aren't so vulnerable, where tragedies like this are prevented.
So the final thought for you, listening. What lessons do we take from Imperial Avenue? How can we as communities do better at protecting everyone, especially the most vulnerable among us?
It's something we all need to think about. How do we make sure the missing are seen and heard and protected?
Really critical questions, worth considering long after this deep dive ends. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you. It's been a difficult topic, but an important one to explore.